from that sharp focus on the issue, let's broaden it worldwide. What is the global situation? Let's bring in Gavin Yamey, Professor of Global Health at Duke University, for more perspective on this one. Gavin, thanks for being with us. I'm wondering, where is the actual hotspot for COVID-19 right now? I know cases in Latin America, for instance, continue to rise.
Yes, so good evening. Thank you for having me. It's great to be back on France 24 again. You're right, there are around 15 million cases, but a half are in 3 countries, obviously the most by far here in the US, the country that has done the worst at controlling the epidemic, but also Brazil, India. Those are 3 of the great hotspot countries. And in fact, 2/3 of all cases, 10 million cases, are in 10 countries. And I think the story of the pandemic right now is that there are countries that have done well to bring down cases. In fact, some have even got to close to eliminating community transmission, like New Zealand, Taiwan, close to eliminating community transmission. A range of countries that have done well using basic public health measures. Vietnam, which has had 0 deaths, Rwanda, Greece, Scotland. Scotland is doing tremendously, unlike its neighbour to the south, England, which has had one of the highest death rates in terms of deaths per million people in the world. So it really is a divergent picture. Countries that have followed the science, that have instigated known evidence-based public health measures, have managed to bring the virus under control. They are what's called getting to 0 cases. And you know that there isn't a huge amount of mystery right now as to what it is you need to do to get on top of the virus. It's about finding every case, isolating cases. Whoever's been exposed, you want to quarantine them. You have to identify them through contact tracing and quarantine them. We need people to remain distant from each other. We want as many people masked as we can. We want people hand washing. We don't want people, and we know this from Japan, we know this from studies in Japan, we don't want people inside who are talking or shouting in places like bars, karaoke bars, for example, churches singing. Those appear to be high risk for so-called super spreading events. So the countries that are able to do the fundamentals are doing well. Places like the United States doing the worst, on Earth. We are 4 or 5% of the world's population with 26% of the cases, and daily cases are rising, as are, unfortunately, deaths. We are not doing the basics well.
It sounds like what you're saying is the kind of advice that people who speak to us from Africa, for instance, many of our viewers there are saying, what is the situation? What should we be doing? Is that what you'd urge African countries to take on board, to try to impose and to encourage if they can?
Yeah, so I think what's really fascinating is that many of the so-called developed nations, right, the rich nations, have actually done the worst, right? They, I think, have felt that this sort of pandemic wouldn't hit them, they wouldn't be affected, that they had the knowledge on how to do it well. And in fact, many low and middle income countries have done the best. And I mentioned Rwanda earlier, Ghana, another country that is doing well. I mean, there is scientific public health consensus, unanimous views on the ways in which we reduce community transmission, the transmission of the virus from one person to another. And many countries have done these things very well, basic public health measures. And unfortunately, places like the UK and the US have performed poorly. They've performed poorly on the basics of things like testing and contact tracing and quarantining. I mean, we have horrendous outbreaks, horrific humanitarian catastrophes, particularly in the South here in the United States, in places like Arizona and Texas. I mean, my state where I live right now is a hot zone, North Carolina, with cases rising. We are not doing the basics here. We are not scaling up testing. We are not scaling up contact tracing. It's an absolute dumpster fire, and people are dying as a result.
Gavin Yamey, we could talk much more, but sadly time against us. Thank you, sir, for joining us once again. It's a pleasure to have your analysis and your frankness, quite frankly, because this is something that needs to be dealt with in a very straightforward manner. And your plain speaking, Gavin, I think, hitting home for many of us. Thank you very much indeed. Gavin Yamey, a professor in global health at Duke University, speaking to us from the United States there. That's it for this bulletin, but stay with us. More to come. You're watching live from Paris.